We are heading into a quiet weekend, but it is not quiet in the Atlantic Ocean. There are now 3 named storms and a tropical depression. Fiona, the hurricane, heads to Canada. Gaston stays in the North Atlantic, impacting the Azores. Hermine is off the west coast of Africa, probably won't last very long. And the one that's most significant to us is the tropical depression. Tropical depression number 9. Which will likely become a tropical storm overnight or by early tomorrow. It's the one that's in the Caribbean. It's that disturbance people have been talking about for the last several days. And right now it's passing south of Haiti on a track that's going to take it close to Jamaica. Tropical depression now, likely becoming a tropical storm before early tomorrow, and then becoming a hurricane as it approaches the Cayman Islands and western Cuba. And notice that forecast cone gets into the Gulf of Mexico by Tuesday, potentially as a hurricane, with winds of 110 miles an hour. Now the forecast cone, just for the center of the storm, right now the 5th day of that cone is centered basically over the Florida peninsula, and that shows us a wind speed projected of 115 miles an hour. If it's a perfect forecast, as in accuracy and location, well, the center would be between Fort Myers and Tampa, sometimes Wednesday mid-afternoon with winds of 115 miles an hour. If it moves more fast than the models are projecting, it could be near Jacksonville. If it comes in more slowly, it could still be closer to Cuba on Wednesday midday. And there is that possibility it could go more to the east, heading toward the Bahamas. And for us, the scenario we'll watch carefully is that it still could take a track in the eastern portion of the Gulf of Mexico, heading toward North Florida. And in that scenario, definitely would have some sort of impact here. But remember, we're talking 5 days out. If you do target practice of any type, you aim for that bullseye, but you miss a whole lot. And that miss area, that circle, that's the 5th day forecast cone, because you can never really hit the target. But even more important to know is when you're looking at a storm forecast 5 days out, the radius of error is about 200 miles. So that's 400 miles across, and the wind could be plus or minus 15 or more miles per hour. I've got much more on that in the forecast in just a few minutes.
All right.
NBC 15 weather with Chief Meteorologist Alan Sealls, certified most accurate forecast by Weather Rate.
We will enjoy a pleasant weekend filled with sunshine on the Gulf Coast, approaching 90 degrees tomorrow, nice and peaceful across the area. Not so peaceful, though, in the rest of the world. In the Caribbean right now, tropical depression number 9, that formed this afternoon. It's a system that's moving west-northwestward. It is going to strengthen, likely becoming a tropical storm this evening or tonight or early tomorrow, approaching Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, the western tip of Cuba, and along the way, steadily strengthening. By the time it gets to Cuba, it will likely be a hurricane. And that means once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, it'll be a stronger hurricane. Look at that projection. Early Tuesday, winds could be well over 100 miles an hour. The 5-day forecast cone shows all of the Florida peninsula in a spot where you've got to be on guard for a direct strike possibility. Winds projected on Wednesday, 115 miles an hour. And remember that 5th day of the forecast cone, there's a lot of uncertainty, but we know that's the general focus area. It's an area that's 200 miles in a radius, 400 miles across, and that wind that I showed you as a projection, 115 miles an hour, plus or minus when you add in the error, which means it could easily get to 120, 130 miles an hour, or it could be closer to 100 miles an hour. All of this subject to change. There's the rainfall. Notice our area along the north central Gulf Coast is not going to see any significant rain going into the weekend and beyond the weekend, but this projection for central Florida, over a foot of rain, that's going to be to the right of the path of wherever this system goes. And if it comes closer to us, and not too close, we'll actually have a dry north wind. The next name on the list, Ian. You're saying, where did all these names come from? Well, take a look at the big picture. There's Hermine out in the eastern Atlantic, Gaston in the North Atlantic, and then there is Fiona, still a hurricane. It's going to strike Newfoundland tonight in Nova Scotia. Still is a hurricane, and then rapidly transition to a storm that's not technically a hurricane, but that will produce hurricane force damage and conditions across eastern Canada. Gaston impacting the Azores, it's going to curve right back to where it came from, but not re-strengthen. And then, as I mentioned, the eastern Atlantic, that's Hermine. That's the new storm. It's a tropical storm that probably won't last more than a few days, fortunately, and hopefully stay out in the open waters. It's a lot to keep up with. Don't underestimate how that forecast cone I showed you can change. It does change when the data changes. Right now we've got 90 degrees, sapphire skies in Mobile, a light north wind, perfect evening for football, and your 7-day tracker is not too bad. It shows highs close to 90 for the next several days. Maybe a shower late Sunday into Sunday night. And then look at the trend. If all goes well for us, we'll actually cool down in the middle of next week.